Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today, Riot published an article talking about their most recent round of changes to allow some champions to jungle as of late, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the things they talked about in the article, essentially why Riot do these kinds of changes to some champions and not to others, and specifically where I think the balance of these champions is at, now that they're sort of in that situation where they can be played in the jungle. So, first let's talk about the champions. Now, if you were looking at the patch notes over this last week, obviously there was a whole section about jungle-specific changes for these champions that really opened them up to jungle viability. Things like Darius' passive doing 300% bonus damage to jungle monsters, Zed's passive having no cap against jungle monsters, Morgana getting more heals when applied to jungle monsters specifically. A lot of these changes were all towards the jungle specifically, so none of this is affecting the champion's power outside of the jungle itself. Now, it does give them some sort of hedge utility in this similar situation to Kai'Sa E being able to stack infinitely on things like Baron for some degree of objective control. There is a little bit of utility in Darius' passive, for example, doing 300% bonus damage against Baron means that you can do it a little bit faster than you would be able to ordinarily in some situations, but generally speaking, all these changes were intended to do is to be power neutral, except for the fact that this champion will now feel slightly better when played in the jungle. Now, this isn't the first time Riot has done this either. There was a previous round of changes that they made where they really sort of opened up the jungle to a bunch of more popular champions. I know they made a previous round of changes to Darius and Garen specifically. I know they've also touched Teemo before and allowed him to kind of jungle. And I know there are a couple other champions that they've looked at before and essentially said, you're allowed to jungle now. We're going to give you sort of jungle-specific abilities in your kit or jungle-specific damage in your kit in order to open this up and allow you to be played in this role. And the question for a lot of players is sort of like, why is this happening? I don't understand what is the point of allowing these champions into the jungle, right? Because when you really look about it, none of these champions are particularly good in the jungle. Like, none of these champions, I think, are going to replace junglers that currently exist right now, because those junglers kind of have a mix of stats and utility that sort of allow them to thrive in a place like the jungle. If you consider things like Lee Sin or Warwick or even Master Yi to a certain extent, who I feel like is in the jungle for a different reason, but either way, these champions are in the jungle not just because they can clear the jungle, but because they bring a useful toolbox out of the jungle, right? Lee Sin being able to sort of emerge from the jungle with multiple different paths to gank you thanks to his extreme mobility. Warwick being able to really prowl around the map at super high speeds with very good objective control. You have champions like Shyvana who are able to counter jungle the enemy quite efficiently due to the fact of how fast she's able to clear and sort of how easily she's able to control things like Dragon. Like, all of these champions are bringing something to the jungle pool beyond just they can clear the jungle. Whereas a lot of the champions that are being buffed up are essentially just being allowed to clear the jungle. And now this is actually a pretty significant thing, as not every champion in the game can be played in the jungle. I would say that there are a lot of champions that just don't even have remotely that degree of viability. You can think about, let's say, Aphelios, I don't think is a champion that could ever jungle. Kai'Sa, I don't think is a champion that could ever jungle. Azir jungle, I've played that before. It's garbage, don't do it. You know, you have these kind of situations where, you know, these champions are now allowed to be played in the jungle, which is a significant feat in and of itself. But essentially, that's not really the reason Riot are doing it. They're not getting into a situation where they're saying, okay, yeah, these champions are going to be allowed to jungle because we think they're going to be good for the jungle in any significant regard. But instead, it's because Riot are trying to improve the viability of the jungle, especially at lower levels, and sort of the ease at which players can learn to jungle. For the most part, jungle is the hardest role in this game to learn, because once you've gotten used to one lane, you can kind of do all of the lanes. Bot lane, of course, is a little bit different from top or mid, because you have a laning partner there to help you out. But fundamentally, you're doing essentially the same things. You're standing in a lane, you're dealing with minion waves, you're dealing with 1 to 2 opponents who are in the lane, you're pushing towers, you're sort of figuring it out in that regard. And that's 4 of the 5 roles in which you are inhabiting a lane and sort of doing this thing. The jungle is completely different and has a very, very new skill set that you kind of have to learn and master as you're figuring it out. You know, if you think about the sort of flowchart of learning the jungle, you need to learn things like spawn timers, crab control, how to smite, how to rotate, how to gank, and sort of play the mental game of jungling as well once you start to get to higher levels of sort of predicting where is the enemy jungler, where, you know, can I go for this crab, what side did he start on, am I being efficient with my buffs, all that kind of a thing. That's a lot to learn comparatively to something like last hitting, which if you're top, you're mid, you're bot, it doesn't matter. You're going to be focusing on last hitting. Trading, every single lane is going to do that. All those skills are going to transition over, but the jungle doesn't have that. That's completely different. And the biggest problem then that you have is that if you're a newer player who is maybe familiar with one, maybe two champions, odds are none of the champions you play are good junglers. So now on top of the fact that you need to learn how the jungle works, you will also have to learn a brand new champion on top of that. Newer players are very sensitive to new champions because they get very used to, okay, I know what this champion does, I know how their kit works, I can definitely perform on them. It's a completely different matter when you're in an unfamiliar environment on an unfamiliar champion, essentially relearning the game all at the same time, which means that a lot of players then just don't play the jungle or don't learn it until much later in their careers because they sort of don't have the ability to figure that out, and I totally agree with them. It's a very difficult proposition to find the champion that you like in the jungle and then play the jungle and learn the jungle on this champion at the same time. So the changes here are essentially designed to allow these players to have a little bit better of an experience while playing in the jungle, to sort of give them an opportunity to learn the jungle to a certain regard and to get into a situation where they can be comfortable while playing a champion that they probably already play. All the champions who have received these bonuses, if you've been keeping track, are super common or popular champions, especially at lower levels. Champions like Teemo, Garen, Darius, Zed, they're all champions that newer players are super likely to gravitate towards and to play a lot of. And they're also relatively inexpensive champions. I think Darius is still a 6,300 champion, which is kind of ridiculous now. I might be wrong about that, but either way, he's still a fairly expensive champion, but they're champions that players will sort of get used to and sort of be like, okay, I know how to play this champion. They may have gravitated towards them before, and then it gives them the option of then playing this champion that they're already used to down in the jungle. So if I am a brand new player who is doing nothing but play Darius because I like Darius and I figured him out and I decide I'd like to learn how to jungle, well now I can just play Darius in the jungle and not have to relearn both my champion and a new role at the same time. At least I know what I'm doing on Darius, I just have to do it in the jungle. This doesn't mean that Darius is like a good or viable jungler, like I was kind of talking about before. He does have a lot of disadvantages, like being extremely limited range. Like I feel like the only time Darius is going to pull off a successful gank is if he goes Ghost, or if the enemy laner is all the way at your tower. Like maybe in that specific situation, Darius is going to look like an okay jungler, but like outside of that, he's only going to be able to clear. But at the very least, like that's not the point. Viability is not the point with any of these changes. It's just to say, hey, look, these champions can now be played in the jungle. And so then this naturally brings up the question, well, okay, my main seems like a fairly decent champion for beginners to play or that people could gravitate towards. Why can't they be played in the jungle? Especially you can consider things like AD carries like Varus or Ashe, who can be very popular, especially early on. Well, why can't they be played in the jungle? Why aren't they receiving jungle-focused changes? A lot of this is because Riot are specifically choosing champions that hopefully won't have an impact on pro play because of how powerful flexing champion picks can be. If you're not a person who follows the pro scene particularly closely, I can totally understand if you aren't familiar with this concept, but a lot of times some of the most popular or powerful picks in pro play are champions that can be played in a variety of different lanes. And what it does is it allows the pro teams to pick a powerful champion, let's say Echo, and then sit on it and say, you don't actually know where we're going to be sending this Echo. Right, we can early pick this because it's strong, and we don't have to worry about being counterpicked because they have the option of playing the Echo in the mid lane, but if a mid lane counterpick is chosen by the enemy team, well then we just flex the Echo into the jungle. And you kind of see something similar to that with Sylas back in the day, where Sylas was viable in like 3 different lanes, so teams essentially had no reason to not early pick him if he was up, and then it was essentially impossible for their opponents to have a counterpick or to even remotely approach Sylas because, well, even if you choose a good top laner into Sylas or a good mid laner into Sylas, he can be flexed into any of the other positions that sort of negate that possibility. And you really don't know where he's going then until the very last pick that the enemy team has, which means that if you're trying to grab counter picks for yourself or powerful picks that are still vulnerable to Sylas, essentially it really limits your abilities to do anything in draft. So right, are trying to avoid situations like that. Some champions are okay to be flexed, but other champions, you have to have a limitation on how many different champions can sort of be flexed in pro play. So they really want to avoid that, and they also want to avoid champions who are particularly degenerate if they're able to perform well in the jungle. Camille, for example, was a jungler for hot minute in pro play, but she was absolutely nutty in the jungle thanks to her really powerful level 2 ganks and crab control, and she had a really, really fast clear thanks to the attack speed she gained from her E. So Camille was sort of in a situation in a similar fashion to like Season 2 Alistar jungle, where essentially because of how powerful this champion's level 2 ganks were, the enemy team had to just concede wave control in every situation early in the game because they didn't know where the Camille was, but they had to respect the level 2 gank, and because of that, Camille got free roam with the jungle for the early levels, which really set her up on a path to success and made her very strong. In that kind of a situation, Riot don't want to open the jungle back up to a champion like that, even if she's historically been played in the jungle, because she was played in the jungle in the degenerate fashion, and Riot want to make sure that the strengths a champion is bringing to the jungle aren't overriding their sort of innate weaknesses that the champion should have in the first place. So generally speaking, I feel like none of the champions that have been buffed up are those sort of degenerate champions, but if you're sort of wondering, well, hey, this champion was played in the jungle, why can't we bring that back? Essentially, that's what Riot are looking to avoid, but we'll see if any more champions in the future do get sort of jungle-exclusive changes. Anyways, that's going to be it for me today, guys. I will have that full article linked down in the description below if you guys do want to go check it out, but I hope this was informative and kind of an interesting way of learning about why Riot are making these sort of jungle-exclusive changes. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave a like, and if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.